Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. You are a busy Fort Worthian doing all the things to make sure your family, your lives, your goals are met. And I know a lot of you are changing the city in many different ways, and we're so thrilled that you listen to the podcast. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I feel like we were just here a minute ago because
Yes.
we are doing some recording off of our regular schedule, and it has had us here more frequently than a
Yes.
whole week.
Yes.
So it seems a little...
Yeah, we're recording on Wednesday, so odds are that means something crazy is going to happen, when we don't.
Yeah, we'll
On
drop
Saturday.
this on Monday, and
Yeah.
people will be like, why didn't they talk about this thing that happened on Thursday?
Yeah.
But we're both traveling this weekend, so
Yes.
we had to do some fancy stuff because we get in trouble when we don't drop a pod.
Yeah,
People
yeah,
miss
yeah.
us.
And is yours travel family base?
Yes, I'm going to visit my dad, and my oldest child is going to come down and visit my dad too. I'm going to Santa Barbara. It's very cool there. It's lovely weather. I'm very much
Yeah.
looking forward to it. I'm going to walk in the sand.
Yeah.
I'm going to touch the
Come on now.
ocean. I'm super, super excited.
Yeah. I'm going to see my grandpa, who and my grandma who lives in Philadelphia, but he came back from Puerto Rico, so they're together. So I'm just gonna go up there and hang out. Not a lot of moments like that are left. So
Yeah.
this is probably one of those last ones where he'll actually remember me. So I'm like, I got to get there.
Yeah, my grandparents have been gone for a very long time, so I do encourage you to do that. I remember my grandmother. I wish I had reached out to her a little bit more. I was kind of in my selfish stage
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
she was getting to the end of her life.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's something that, I'm looking forward to, but that is why we're recording to all of you on a Wednesday. And we got stuff to talk about. I mean, a lot has happened, and we'll discuss it. One thing that came up, and this is more like, I want to appreciate this reporter we have Cecilia Linzen. Man, these names keep changing. I'm like...
They're hiring a lot of new people, and people are moving around. So yeah, it's not the same old.
Yeah. But yeah, I just think this reporter talked about Fort Worth's proclamation process and how the council members are divided, and there just seems like a lot of tea being exposed here on how what once used to feel like a natural thing where everyone just kind of signed proclamations when the staff had them for community things, now seems to go tit for tat, and now you're having different council members going back and forth. As a council member, I want to imagine you in your own seat. If this was going on while you were sitting in office, how do you see this kind of going back and forth? Specifically, also Chris Nettles and Mr. Lauersdorf really seem the two to be the main part of this story.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a process with 30 days in advance request for these, and we actually expedited some while I was there and did it in less than 30 days. I think that process works just fine. I think in this situation, the individual council members kind of being reluctant to sign off on proclamations that maybe they personally have an issue with. When you represent a group of people, some of those people are going to be in favor of things and some of those people are going to be opposed to things, and you're not going to be able to satisfy all of them. But sometimes you even have to put your own personal beliefs aside in order to be for the we and not the me.
When we were talking about it, so right, you have Chris Nettles kind of talking about how he's really frustrated that this is becoming a difficult process and that we're not all on the same page, and they really use playful messages back and forth, so much that Lauersdorf even calls Nettles brother, like, "Hey brother, sorry, we're not going to see eye
I think
to eye."
a lot of that is, everything that an elected official does is open to an open records request possibility. And so when I was reading some of these emails back and forth, I was thinking maybe some people lost track of the fact that this could be written in the front page of the newspaper. I mean, that's what they say all the time when you're in elected office. You shouldn't say or write anything that you wouldn't be totally comfortable with being on the front page of a newspaper.
Yeah.
And it's not that what they're saying is, so scathingly inappropriate. But it is it's kind of like when you read an article and you can tell that they've just used a recording and they write down every single that a person says in an interview. Sometimes I think you just lose track of the fact that if this is put into a different context or written out in a newspaper for people to read, how it might come across. Because some of this back and forth came across as a little immature, I would say.
And I apologize for people who are new 817 pod listeners. The reason why this proclamation is in the news and being discussed is because we do a proclamation every Pride Month, which was June, but this year the entire city council did not do a full city council proclamation support for Pride Month. And a lot of the discussions and arguments around that was because now we were supporting and acknowledging specific organizations. And so then several of the council people were just kind of like, I don't know these organizations, so therefore I can't do the proclamation.
Yeah, I mean, when I was asked to sign proclamations, I would get the information from staff. I would read it. If I had any questions myself, I would, as one of the council members suggested to another council member, Google and go and do some research myself to make sure. I might run it by somebody that I trusted. You know, do you have any concerns about this? And then move on or ask the questions that needed to be asked. So I think that the 30 days probably gives you enough time to do that, even if the staff takes half of those to get the information together before they send it to a council member. You know, you get your packets on a Friday before a Tuesday when you're making decisions. You might have heard, you usually hear about things that are on the council packet the week before. So you have 1 week to read through M&Cs and ordinance changes and zoning changes and all of that. So I think doubling the time to like 60 days seems extreme to me. And then again, I just don't know if individual council members are going to refuse to sign things because they personally have some issue with it, or they're worried that some of their constituents are going to be opposed to it. I think we're going to have a hard time getting consensus of all of them on some of these going forward. And, you know, that is an interesting thing because Fort Worth has been known as a city that kind of gets along and is congenial as elected officials. And they always pointed to Dallas and said, you know, we don't want to be like Dallas because they kind of get petty in their meetings and go at each other in their meetings and publicly disagree in sometimes not the most polite way. And I think when we were discussing adding additional council members to Fort Worth, there was some concern that that's what would happen. I don't think everybody needs to agree all the time. I think having discussions about disagreements is an important thing to do. I think being polite about it is also important.
I kind of see I don't mind the council being on the same page. And I think the council is a great space for us to show meeting in the middle and compromising and having dignified collaboration and sharing each other's opinions. But I think proclamations should be continued, signed by everyone. If the city is going to make a proclamation, that means all of us, believe this should matter and should be important. And I don't think that should go away where proclamations are now, 4/5 supported by the city or,
Yeah, I mean, I think the current process where you can individually do certificates of recognition out of individual offices, multiple council members could get together and do the certificates of recognition the way that Council Member Beck did in this case. That all can still happen. But like you said, I agree, proclamations are from everybody.
Yeah, and I think steel manning the argument and looking at it from the other side of like a Charles Lauersdorf or Macy Hill in the sense of, right, I totally agree, like politicians should share new ideas, share fresh ideas and perspectives, have a vision, but ultimately it's your citizen seat. And if you have citizens who identify as LGBTQ and
which I'm sure every single district does,
then and that seems like you need to show that you're actually supporting your entire community. But the steelman side is, I understand that there are people who, like the Beau Frenches of the world, who will then attack these people and put a lot more stress for them being people who compromise and be there for their entire constituents, because there's people like Beau French in the Beau French camp who wants to make people's lives miserable if you're a Democrat or a part of the LGBTQ
and make
community.
Tarrant County inhospitable.
Yeah, inhospitable.
As he says in his Twitter account.
To anyone who doesn't think like them. And so that's where these proclamations, I think, give these council members a space to have courage and pride to showcase that I have a dignity, and that they need to respect that dignity index of like, and we can track that they're actually being there for everyone regardless of their individual rules. And that's where I think this proclamation starts. I'm going to start keeping score. If that's the case, if people are not going to sign them all, then it's like, okay, where are we, and what are you willing to, say no to? And because then that means there's people in power that you're saying yes to.
Yeah, and I think that was what Councilmember Nettles was pointing out, that he thinks that if we are going to go forward, that it should be publicly stated who is not signing things and who is. It's similar when zoning cases come up. Often somebody will make a motion to deny a zoning case, and the attorneys were constantly saying, you all need to put on the record why you're doing something, especially if you're doing something that's not in line with what the staff report indicates. And that doesn't always happen. And I think that a lot of times that's just not fully doing your job. I think you need to be prepared to go on record to say why you're doing certain things.
Also, I see your lovely face in this photo, by the way. I just noticed you're in the photo supporting the proclamation.
Smiling big, standing in the way back on my
like
tippy
the tall
toes.
people do. Like the tall people do.
I'm on my toes in that picture, just so we're clear. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been able to stick up that high.
But I do appreciate that you, even though you're not an elective official anymore, you still get involved, you still show up, and you show that you're not just doing this to be someone with power. Even when the power is gone and you're no longer at the seat, you're still making sure seats are warm for people.
Yeah,
so,
I try.
That's awesome. Now let's go ahead and move into story number 2, which is we're going to talk about the Tarrant County Jail situation, because 2 kind of things have really been updated. You brought this first part to my attention, so I would love for you to kind of guide us through. I guess Tarrant, you were sitting in a panel with the commissioner, and somehow we want more explanation about how the jail operates, and basically Sheriff Bill Wayborn's like, no point to doing that. I'm not showing up.
Yeah, I mean, and he's done that before, so I guess we shouldn't be surprised. Interestingly enough, I had somebody comment earlier this week about how a lot of the articles that we've been talking about lately have been out of the Fort Worth Report, and how we should be really glad that we have the Fort Worth Report. And I just looked down at the list of all the articles we're talking about today, and almost all of them are Star Telegram.
Yeah.
So this first article is a Star Telegram article. Tarrant commissioners want sheriff to explain how jail operates. He says there is no point. And again, Commissioner Simmons had asked for a briefing from the sheriff's office about their standard operating procedures in the jail, and no one from the sheriff's office showed up to deliver it, putting Elisa Simmons in a position of basically having to ask questions to an empty podium. They did send over a written statement that basically said that they respectfully declined to give a public briefing, and listed off the laundry list of mandates and rules and regulations that they believe they're operating under, and that briefing the entire commissioner's court on all of those guidelines would take too long and was not practical. And so they literally said that briefing on all of the 250 plus standard operating procedures would take approximately 4.5 hours with multiple experts testifying, and that this is not a practical idea, and that he believes that this is political grandstanding by Commissioner Simmons. He sent over a written statement, which the staff had to read out loud, and that was the end of that.
Giving context for everyone, too, who may be a new member, is Tarrant County Sheriff Bill Wayborn has had a huge rise of deaths in jail compared to the leadership in the same seat before he was there. And recently we're dealing with a case with Anthony Johnson, the passing of a man who passed with a officer who was basically had his knee on him from the back as he was on his chest. And there's video out, but not the full video. There's the family has lawyers. They're really been active showing up to city council meetings. And there's a lot of questions that need to be asked and answered. And so as a commissioner, you are there to do your job and wonder why are our rates so high and why are these things happening. And so that is what's happening there. Now, giving you other context, we've had 2 episodes, one with Bud Kennedy, who talked about how no one has power over anyone. So Bill Wayborn
they're all their own bosses.
Yeah, he can just walk around and say, nope, I ain't got to listen to you. And so this is the shenanigans within the county. Another episode that we just had was last week's episode where we talked about who showed up to the Texas True Project event and showed up for that. And we said Sheriff Bill Wayborn showed up for those events. He showed up for that event. So let's be clear. He is a voted county official.
Who's up for election in November.
Who's up for election in November. Who also has another colleague who wants him to show up to a pretty reasonable job request. Oh, there's no point. But there's a point to show up to the Texas True Project event?
Well, and even Republican County Commissioner Manny Ramirez said that he was disappointed that the sheriff declined to show up and didn't prioritize bringing forward the office's policies and procedures. He said he would agree with County Commissioner Simmons that industry-wide in law enforcement, general orders, certain SOPs are not necessarily even specific, but general orders are publicly available. And I guess in the case of the sheriff's office, these are not published on a website somewhere. So he was saying even that is a disappointment to him.
Yeah. And that
he called it radical transparency is probably the best policy.
I know. Look at growth. Look at growth. Look at that. I mean, and that's when you have when you have 2 sides of the aisle coming together and talking about concerns. I just don't. I mean, I think Wayborn has enough famous fans. He's just been around long enough that I don't think he's not gonna win his seat again. And let's be clear, if Mr. Moses, who's I guess the other person who's running against him, I haven't heard a lot from him, and I know he's also has other jobs as a pastor. Someone gave me his contact to reach him out to be on the pod, ghosted, not response, and so I'm not. Maybe I'm just saying I just don't know. I do believe when you see Patrick Moses in the room, you're like, oh, this can be the guy who gets people out to vote. But I'm afraid that I'm only seeing that in very, very small traditional rooms. I don't see him on social media. I don't see him in these news stories. I don't see him on bigger podcasts than ours. I understand if our pod's not big enough. But yeah, so I just don't know how maybe Wayborn's just like, you know what, I can do what I want. Because that's, how much I got it locked in the bag that I don't need to worry about anything that Elisa Simmons has to say, or all you people can continue to show up, which to me should make all of us really, really mad and continue to show up and fight the vote because if you can't get him, we can get somebody, because we showed up that had a lot closer election. So, there's other Republicans who wish Wayborn didn't get other Democrats fired up to vote against him, or even now Republicans. I mean, there's a lot of people who are like, what he's doing is unacceptable.
Yeah, I think most people are saying that.
Yeah. And so maybe that also gets us to get the county back a little bit to the middle. The second story about the Tarrant County jail system is that Tarrant County will hire outside lawyers for guards in jail death lawsuit. The Tarrant County Commissioners voted Tuesday to approve the hire of outside legal representation for 2 jailers listed as co-defendants in a lawsuit against the county by the family of a man killed in county jail in April. The vote was 4-1, with Precinct 2 Commissioner Elisa Simmons voting against it. Moreno was one of the guards, will be represented by Fort Worth attorney Kenneth East at an hourly rate of $280. Arlington attorney Jim Jeffrey will represent Garcia for $250 an hour. Each hiring was approved for up to $30,000, with other charges pending further approval by the county commissioners. Texas law allows the county commissioners to hire outside attorneys in the case that the complaint of civil suit forms the basis of filing a criminal charge against county officials or employees. So that is saying here that this is really interesting because, right, you have two guards who, I mean, I'm not saying that these guards should feel have a lot of empathy due to the situation, but I mean, they have to fight against, one, their wrongdoing to Anthony Johnson, but then also the system, it seems like, who is just like, also, you remember Bill Sheriff Wayborn firing them, now brought him back because he didn't do that correctly. And so, like, they're living in a system where they have to get outside help because they're probably trying to protect themselves from their job and protect themselves from the civil suit against the murder of Anthony Johnson. And so, like, we're now dealing with tax dollars being spent. County dollars being spent on outside lawyers for these two individuals. And Elisa Simmons being like the only person to say, hey, I'm not going to, I know it's by law allowed, but that doesn't mean I have to vote for it.
Yeah, I think it's a common practice. I mean, the city of Fort Worth often did this for cases involving police officers because the lawyers at the city represent the city. And so to have a different lawyer representing individuals who are also being sued, I think is a very common practice. And
I guess where I'm trying to, it almost seems very anti-worker to me, though, in the sense of like, whatever the worker does under uniform, the consequence should go to the institution. And it feels like the worker is now having to fight the institution and the wrongdoing to the person, so that the county can be safe or the city can be safe from the situation.
That's, I think, called governmental immunity.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of that.
Yeah. So, and obviously I'm not a lawyer. I don't, know any of this riffraff, but I don't know. I just think that's like,
I mean, it's often in those cases, the governmental entity gets sued, but is extracted because of governmental immunity. And then the case goes on with other people. And so in that case, you would have to have separate representation. But there's a lot of things that are covered by governmental immunity that can be pretty frustrating for people because it opts the government out of being
liable,
quote unquote, liable, responsible for these things.
Yeah.
And, in some cases it helps with frivolous things, but in other cases it's probably detrimental.
Yeah, and I guess, like, to me, the incentive of changing your culture in your jails becomes less of a priority when you're always immune.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned,
and you can just blame it on a bad officer.
Right.
You just keep blaming it on a bad officer rather than realizing the culture. If we have to give Anthony Johnson's family $1 million. And we got to keep doing that. And I feel like you would change your culture pretty quickly because we don't got that kind of money.
You mentioned before, this is a little bit of pivot, but that I attended a panel earlier this month that Commissioner Simmons was at. And that panel was on mental health and the jails and the fact that they've pointed to the large number of people suffering from mental health issues that are in jail, and that the sheriff even described that as, them being the biggest provider of mental health services. But they're not really providing mental health services in jail. That's not the place that people who are suffering from mental health issues should be. And on that panel, Elisa Simmons brought up the fact that there's a diversion center now that has 40 beds where officers can make a decision to take people to the diversion center instead of to jail, and that those beds are going unused, that they're not full.
Wow.
And some of it, she pointed to other agencies in Tarrant County not wanting to come all the way to Fort Worth where the diversion center is located because it adds a 20-minute commute to take the person there and a 20-minute commute back, and then they still have to fill out a report in their home precinct. But that place could be filled just with Fort Worth police officers if they were utilizing it to the extent that I think they should. And that may be anecdotal. I may not have all the information. But the thing that keeps me from calling police on people that are look to be suffering from some kind of mental health crisis or an addiction issue or whatever is often the concern that won't be handled in a way that is de-escalating for the person that's having that situation. And they literally have a place where they can take them to not take them to jail. And that place is not being utilized to the full extent. And my understanding from the panel that I attended is that is being funded through COVID dollars at the county level. And the concern is they won't continue to find funding to have that place continue if it's not utilized to the full extent. And so speaking of shifting the culture and what people do, it's going to take convincing police officers that this is another tool in their tool belt that they should be utilizing, and that they shouldn't look at it as extra 20 minutes of commute time to take someone to a diversion center when you can alleviate people being in jail for however many dollars a day it is, 80 something dollars a day. And they went back to that example that they had shared previously where someone who was in jail on a $25 bond spent 160 something days in jail, and it costs 80 something dollars a day to house that person in jail. And it was someone experiencing homelessness who didn't have $25 to post bond. So anyway, I just want to get that in there because I want more people
huge.
to know about the diversion center, and we need to utilize the diversion center.
We probably need to spend more time on this diversion center and like have some type of conversation more deeply with someone about that, because that seems wild.
Yeah.
But
back to not having our jails be a mental health warehousing situation, because that's what it tends to be.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of what you have there. We're working on kind of just staying updated with this. I mean, we still don't have the full 15-minute tape that shows you what fully was done. They've been pretty clear on not showing the full tape. And so I believe...
Did they go to the Attorney General to get a review of that question? I think that maybe was the
I know
case.
that's a
like
step.
Whether or not they have to release it.
Yeah, I don't know if they're. I know they're. I mean, I find it fascinating that they're holding on it so much. Obviously, then I think that means something has to be there, and I mean, and if you don't show up for meetings, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of maybe protecting and trying to throw some things under the rug. It just feels like there's a lot of people requesting things from the commissioners to the families, to the videos not being released, to the way we fired these people was incorrectly. And so, like, actually we're having to deal with these outside lawyers for us, and it's just...
Well, I don't know how it changes the outcome of a trial. I mean, it's going to be available for a trial. So releasing it to the public and having it be part of the trial, it's still going to be part of the trial.
Yeah.
So...
Well, we will keep you guys updated as this continues to go on. And just be clear here, realize our sheriff, the person we elect to run our jail system, is not showing up to county commissioner meetings to talk about the situation, but yet is showing up to a Texas True Project event where replacement theory discussions are happening, anti people of color, anti several things that we don't agree with, even centrist Republicans. He's showing up and sitting in those seats, but he's not showing up to answer these questions. I'm surprised not more of us are not fired up about this, as I say those words on this podcast. So let's go ahead and move into short story number 3, which is another
Star Telegram again.
Star Telegram. This one's an opinion. We usually like to stay away from opinion articles, mainly because we're trying to focus on the journalists, right?
We just like our own opinions.
Yeah, there you go. And the editorial board. So a lot of people, right? You have papers, and you're like, why do papers have opinion articles? Well, because actually a lot of favorite people's are the opinion sides, and people like to hear other people's perspectives, and so people have editorial boards, and that is where the people get to write more creatively and have an open-ended opinion, right? But the journalists who are investigative reporters, they're not allowed to do that. So it's important to, us to always know why the opinion section's there and when we're reading opinions articles and when we're not. So we just want to let you guys know this is an opinion article, but I thought it held a lot of weight and shared some really great ideas on this whole how this we talked about the tax appraisal directors making sweeping changes. And this is like the first article where I feel like it started talking about what could be the concerns.
Yeah, so we spoke, I think, last week about those changes and how there seem to be some unintended consequences that might actually result in doing the opposite of what those directors were wanting to do, and that is protect people and their tax dollars and have them not be taxed out of their homes. Because of the fact that they're putting caps on these things and they're doing appraisals every other year, this could lead to the school districts having some issues with bonds that they've already passed and their ability to pay those. So this opinion piece basically starts off by saying that there's no question that Texas property tax system needs some change and that cities and schools need to be more honest about raising our taxes, that the Tarrant County appraisal district directors are making bold steps, but they are going in the wrong direction, in the opinion of the Star-Telegram's editorial board. Their plan to change appraisals will make the system more unfair, not less. First of all, the board's new plan to appraise most properties biannually instead of annually means that property owners in hot suburbs and neighborhoods will not pay their fair share every year of the total totally fund local government. Instead, the money will have to come from the not so hot areas. So in their opinion, this is like Robin Hood in reverse. Originally, the new directors wanted the appraised properties to be every 3 years, but that would have been even worse in their opinion. So they're glad that it's just every 2 years. But there are much more serious problems with the new plan, as the board passed 6 to 3. The plan also sets this 5% threshold, which up to this point, it's been a 10% threshold, limiting the raising of properties' listed market values without a special reappraisal. This is besides the 10% state cap on raising the actual appraised value. So they give a little, this is math. I maybe shouldn't be the one describing the math. But they say, let's say you bought a house in Tarrant County 12 years ago for a price of $149,600. And today the price is $359,000 and a little bit more. But that the 5% threshold has been law. Your market value would be set at $268,000. In other words, you might get about a 25% discount. But if your neighbor just bought the house next door, they wouldn't get this discount at all because their value would be set, at that higher value. So it robs newbies from buying homes or landowners, and it gives the money to those who have owned the same property for years. So maybe I shouldn't be fighting this so strongly since I bought my house in 93.
That's not we over me there.
I know. I'm definitely for the we. I'm for the we, not the me.
No, but I think that's like, that's like the crazy part about this is like you have someone who comes in and buys a house for $400,000, and so when their 5% threshold starts, it starts at that level compared to the person who bought their house for $100,000, and this is terrifying news for wealth creators for this next generation, and it's just like it's really it's keeping a lot of wealth in savings accounts and in assets like homes, because now even as a boomer, you're not going to move and retire into a condo or to another spot because you're kind of stuck. And we talk about freedom, but
that literally, I'm in a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house right now with just my husband.
Yeah. Like so much room for activities. but like honestly, it's like people talk about in Texas, oh, freedom, but like we're all locked into our homes. Like you talk about, oh, communists trying to make you stuck in you don't have freedom. Yo, we really are stuck in our homes. How free is that? You just did this amazing discount if you were someone who has your house for 20 years, but now we're not going to be able to mobilize. And a lot of times those people who do also have those homes has a 30-year-old who lives with them, a 28-year-old who lives with them, how are they going to get out? So it's this, it's a very kind of concerning. And I don't know. I also think it's like maybe why I hope younger people who are looking for homes be more aggressive on I know this is kind of like a maybe gentrification issue. So it's like, I think being mindful and like if you're going to be a good steward of culture, but you have to, I think, really get more humble on the house that you buy, and really start building up areas that are missed and forgotten, and because you can't go compete in these spaces, and then have still money at the end of the day, because the amount of people who then go be these millennials who go buy these $450,000, $550,000 homes, they're house poor and they're stuck because 40% of their income's going. I have some employees that I see them buying houses and I'm getting nervous. Like, guys, I don't, like these, it's like, and now you're stuck to your house, and I can always tell who has the biggest house because they never get the dinner bill when I get the bill.
Because they're paying a big mortgage.
Yeah. So it's the housing market got us hosed, man, and we got to start saying, like, we don't need these things, and we don't need to get over glamored by it all. And I think you just got to go be an entrepreneur and go see a spot, buy something smaller, or like something the same size or whatever.
It's that location thing.
Control the location. You're the asset, and so you can make the location.
So speaking of where people are choosing to buy houses, we've decided that our big story of this pod is going to be the recent announcement.
That was a transition for the century, guys.
No, it seriously
that was
is.
A good one. That was a great transition.
We are definitely looking at where people choose to buy homes, and the fact that we kind of talk about sprawl a lot and people, driving until they qualify and moving further and further away from the core to get a bigger house and not necessarily paying attention to location and what is available in that location. So it's interesting because Walsh Ranch is a development that came to be while I was still on council. It was not in District 9, but they did do their due diligence of reaching out to all the council members to talk about what it was that they were proposing to do. And it is a greenfield development. It is a master planned community where they were proposing to have a variety of housing types, schools, shopping opportunity, healthcare opportunity, all co-located in a master planned community. And so if you're going to be developing in a far-flung space, I think having all of those things available close by so that people don't have to get in their cars and drive long distances to avail themselves of those things is a good idea. But a lot of those people still need to get to the core of the city and get other places. So there's going to be some transportation issues. And in this case, UTA has announced that it is going to be building a new campus in West Fort Worth with its site on 2028 being the opening. So on the western edge of Fort Worth, and this is funny, I'm going to need to go look up on a map because there's been a lot of discussion in the comments on some of these articles about, is this in Fort Worth? Because it's in Parker County, but parts of Parker County, or it's on the edge of Parker County. Parts of Parker County are in Fort Worth. So is it in Fort Worth? Is it in Aledo? Is it in, and Walsh Ranch called itself Walsh Ranch, which is similar to what Alliance did in the far north. Not necessarily labeling itself Fort Worth. But back to the story. UTA got the green light on August 5th to build a new campus known as UTA West in Fort Worth, and they've identified 2 parcels of land that are approximately 51 acres, which will be the location of UTA's West campus. The new president at UTA, Jennifer Cowley, said in her interview that it's a beautiful rolling hills and prairie land. In the spring, it will be full of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, and it's a beautiful scenic part of the region. It is adjacent to Walsh Ranch development, or part of the Walsh Ranch development, at the location where 20 and 30 kind of merge together. And that is a high-end neighborhood in far west Fort Worth, which was planned and is moving in the direction of developing in the way that I described at the beginning of this discussion. I am a UTA alum, and President Cowley is a city planner. And so I have been very excited about that. And she indicates at the end of the article, I don't know if it's this one or the Star Telegram one, where she talks about the opportunity to build this campus from scratch. And Walsh Ranch is a development that is built from scratch. And my concern, and what I've been commenting on some of the articles and comments in social media, has been, we're going to need some rail in the I-30 corridor so that we're not putting additional cars on that corridor.
UTA is one of the largest universities educating kids in the state, and you look at who and the demographics and the medium household incomes those kids come from who go to UTA and get degrees. There's 162,000 alumni who live in North Texas, contributing billions of dollars of economic impact. So UTA is an awesome university, and I've been a huge fan of their downtown office. And I feel like this to me feels like a pivot, and there's a lot of chessboards happening between UTA and Texas A&M, because I would imagine that UTA was not aware of the A&M situation when they went downtown. And
when UTA went downtown?
No, when A&M chose to do their thing, because that happened afterwards.
UTA has had their center in downtown for a long time,
and they didn't. So they went. Yeah, they didn't know that this was coming. So I think if A&M didn't show up, I don't think this happens. I think this stays in downtown.
Yeah, I think there had been discussion about expanding their offerings in the downtown location.
Yeah,
and even the transportation issue had come up between people trying to get from the Arlington campus to downtown. So there's definitely transportation issues there even before this decision to go further west.
But what I'm trying to connect here is that like this feels a little bit like
they didn't want to take on A&M.
Yeah, and maybe they were smart in saying, "Hey, A&M, I'm actually going to get closer to the people who are going to buy that MBA anyways, and just go bid a campus right down the street from their house." And so I actually think they did a good move if they are trying to go against A&M in any kind of capacity. But to me, it also feels a little bit about the reason why there's Chick-fil-A's and Starbucks and restaurants in nice neighborhoods, because there's income there to take from people. And so you put all the restaurants in places where rich people live. But I don't think universities should also take that accord, but that's just what it feels like. They looked at the Excel sheet. They said, what is the average household income of a zip code? These people can pay us for MBAs, so let's go build a campus next to them. Now, this is how you build the challenges of inequity, where you have kids and people on the east side or people in other areas who maybe can't afford these things, right? When you don't have public funded post-secondary education, you then have to do these things. And what happens is Americans, if you have a bachelor's degree, you're getting MBAs, you're getting master's degrees. That rate of change is going in the right direction. But the rate of people who, going to college after high school in Texas is flat or declining, arguably. And so I just think like these university models are starting to build more inequity, because now you're making it easier for the people with money to advance their already one bachelor's degree than where the people who need that bachelor's degree in order to upscale from being a high school graduate, they're not able to do it because they're a high school graduate making $17 an hour at Amazon. And so how do I build an MBA plan there? So unless we really amplify these Amazon and Chipotle's and these people who hire high school kids, and we fund these, get Chipotle to be the, I guess, funders of those people's education, which they do. There's post-secondary programs if you go work for Chipotle, right? Amazon will pay for your education if you work at Amazon. Now there's requirements of doing that. So I don't know. I just think like maybe, you're going to start seeing that the only satellite campuses come from, they're going to be located in white collar neighborhoods or near Amazon factories, because Amazon's paying for these degrees.
It's like co-locating a Walgreens and a CVS.
Yeah.
Well, there is a whole section to the Fort Worth Report article that talks about UTA's expansion comes amid higher ed growth in Tarrant County, and it points to all the other growth that is happening with Charlton and Texas A&M. And when you were talking about schools and where they're located and who they appeal to, I kept getting Wesleyan in my ear, because I've recently been going to several meetings where the new president at Texas Wesleyan has talked about how they're smaller but better, and that almost all of their kids are on some sort of scholarship, and that they are about being attainable, and they are located in a neighborhood where what you're talking about. They are on the east side, and they are choosing to stay there. And they're not only investing in their academic programs there, they're investing in the community there and being part of the community there. So there are universities doing what you're pointing out, that this movement from UTA is the opposite of doing.
And if I'm Texas A&M, I mean, you know, I'm not saying Texas Wesleyan needs someone to acquire them or take them over, and they can hang with the big dogs. I'm not saying they can't, but if I'm Texas A&M, you know, I think, you know, if you could make Texas A&M, you know, a part of that direction, then you're also able to compete, because most of those kids on the east side go to Arlington. They go to UTA, right? And so I don't know, but it's a fascinating conversation on where these migration patterns happen of higher ed institutions, because, again, if you look at the history of America, in the 1850s, we were one of the first to scale primary education. 80% of Americans were able to get primary education in 1850. In 1950 and 1960, we were the first to get 80% of our citizens to a secondary education. 2050 is going to be about who can get 80% of their citizens with a post-secondary credential. And currently we're losing at that to other large mature countries, but other mature countries fund education federally. And especially at a time right now where I feel like there's a lot of people looking for jobs. People saw the employment grew 4.3%, but there is that trend of, I have a lot of friends in my age are like, hey, I'm looking to transition out of my job, but I'm going to go back to school. And so I think that, you know, these people who are making solid money are starting to be able to maybe put up the money to go to these kind of things. So there's a lot of competition, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and the only thing I would tag on to all of this is both of these articles talk about how this is going to bring, you know, additional people to this area, and both of them talk about the planning, and neither of them has anybody mentioning other options of transportation. So, like I said, and I will continue to say it, there needs to be rail in the I-30 corridor to connect these things so that people don't have to get in their cars, because you cannot widen freeways to take care of congestion. It just induces more people to drive, and it will just get right back congested to the way it is.
And these are far out. This is far out too. So it's I mean, you're talking about people on already roads that are booked. So it's going to be very
during rush hour, definitely.
Yeah.
Both I-30, and there are plans right now that TxDOT is looking at. I just got their 95% schematics to review, which, I'm going to need a bigger computer screen to be able to look at those things, for the portion between the Loop 820 and kind of the White Settlement, Las Vegas Trail, Ridgemar area. So they have 95% schematics of that, and I don't see any rail in there, which would be very beneficial. Sacramento went and added all kinds of rail down the middle of their freeways. I grew up in Sacramento with just freeways with no rail, and I go back now and there's rail. So, that Walsh Ranch, like that area and that road, like I went to a wedding recently. I forget, maybe like 3 or 6 months ago, and man, there is so much land and potential over there. Like, you can so tell, like, you know how Dallas has the new Forney. Like, Forney is like, everyone I know who's buying a house, who's my age, they're living in Forney. That is what's happening to Fort Worth. You're gonna have all these cats that UTA is going to be supporting. It's going to be people west of them, even that much further. I mean, it's going to be people. Mineral Wells will be the Forney of Fort Worth. It's going to be people living out in Mineral Wells and all that jazz. So it's going to be interesting. Weatherford. The description of what is out there now, like prairie and stuff, I would hope that they plan to keep some of that, not just develop it all.
Yeah. So that's the big story for you guys. We're excited to talk about higher education because we don't really get to talk about higher education much. And we'll keep you kind of posted. And let's go ahead and move into wins and losses, where Ann and I pick a win and a loss every week for Fort Worth. We share our losses, and then we end on a high note with our wins. And we got some pretty good wins today, so that's good. So what is your loss?
So we didn't talk about
we didn't.
nationwide issues at all. And there was a large announcement that happened between last Monday and Wednesday. And that is that presidential candidate Kamala Harris has announced who her running mate will be. And that is Tim Walz. And I was not as familiar with him. And my loss is not that she selected him. Let me be very, very clear, because I have gotten to know him better in all of this, and I really think he's a fantastic guy. I would like to have a cup of coffee with him. I think, there's just a lot of great things about him, and I think he's great. But what my loss is that there's a narrative going around that this is a radical left-wing pick, and that's just nonsense. The idea that I think the loss for me is that the idea that we couldn't have two women on the ticket, the idea that we couldn't have a woman and an LGBTQ man on the ticket. We have an old white man, and he's actually been accused of being older than he is. And it's just that I think is a little bit amusing, because usually it's women who get criticized for how they look and that sort of thing. But just that whole narrative around this choice and people saying that it's some kind of
radical progressive
move when it's clearly
and you saw that in the Star Telegram, one of the opinion articles were talking about, this was a too radical progressive move, and now Trump has like more to talk about. And it's like,
that opinion piece.
Yeah, and that's just like, guys, if you look at how really everyone was thinking, it's like most people are like, oh yeah, we sure can't have a woman and another woman, that they would lose. And like, so this idea that this is like a progressive move, you're right. Like this is a big loss, that when all these political strategists were sitting in a room, they were like, we are absolutely not going to open up the conversation of two women or, Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris. Like, yeah. And like, we give you a guy who looks like the general manager of Chick-fil-A, who's from the Midwest, and we give you this guy, and yet they're still saying
it's a radical left-wing
They're trying
choice.
to radical. I mean, guys, this is the constant issue of trying to meet in the middle. It's the constant, like, the party that's trying to collaborate. And I'm saying that now in this time and era. I'm not saying it's always been like that. So, yeah, I totally agree with your loss. But, Tim Walz, teacher, baby. Anytime a teacher, coach, military, I mean, and a teacher for a long time. I mean, teachers are the greatest people in the world outside of mamas. I mean, teachers.
You've heard his comment about why he looks as old as he does, because he did lunchroom duty for 20 years. He's like, you don't exit that job with all of your hair. Yeah. No, I love that. And so my loss, kind of staying in the realm of politics, is I read this article in the Dallas Morning News, and I was fascinated because for me, I guess I didn't know this was a thing, but Texas voters suspense list tops 2.1 million. So there's 2.1 million Texans who have voter registration that is suspended. And that is roughly around 18% of people 12%, nearly 12% of the 18 million voters who are registered. And I just find this fascinating that this is existing 3 months before an election, and that there's people out there who might see this word, I'm on the suspense list, so I can't vote. But really, I just want you to know, we're going to put this link in the show notes. Just because your registration is suspended doesn't mean you can't show up to the to vote. You can update it when you're there. But I just think language-wise, and that it's so many people, that's concerning to me. If 12% of people are getting some type of notice or some type of thing that just says your voter stuff is suspended, I just feel like we could have, your voter registration needs to be updated. Well, and you have until October 7th to get it updated. So you can go online and you can update it before that 7th deadline. I don't even think you get a notification of this. I think you just show up at the polls and then they tell you that.
Yeah.
And then if somebody says that, if the poll worker's not doing their job and saying there is another option for you to hear, it's not too late, then you have steps to take. And that's what this article points out. When you said this was your loss and you asked me if I thought that it was a loss, I said, there's so many things that keep people from even going to vote. The likelihood that somebody who has not updated their address on their voter registration is going to show up to vote is probably not huge.
Yeah.
And so
that's
I'm
even
like,
sad,
there's
too.
so many things that are depressing and sad and a loss about lack of voting and lack of citizen engagement that I'm like, okay, yeah, this is another one.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So we'll see how that moves.
But if you
this
stay on the
election.
suspended list for 2 cycles, then you get dropped completely
Yeah.
from the voter rolls. So
Yeah.
that might be a more challenging thing.
So check your voter registration. If you moved, if you missed some spots, if you know someone who hasn't voted in a while, help them out. Let's go ahead and move into our wins.
So I have 2 wins, but they're kind of bundled together. And I think last week we mentioned that your win last week was that Southside Community Gardens received a large grant through Representative Vesey's office. And this week there were 2 more articles because Mark Vesey is on fire, bringing all good things funding to Fort Worth and Arlington area. He brought $500,000 of federal funding to help a nonprofit based with a mission of healthy food for all, which is the Taste Project, which is a restaurant that feeds people regardless of their ability to pay. And I've been a fan of theirs since before they even opened. And not only do they have a restaurant in Fort Worth, they're about to open another restaurant in Arlington. So that was the first win. And then the other one was Mark Vesey again, bringing $850,000 in federal funds are headed to Southeast Fort Worth to improve a park. There is a park called Happy Park. And on a personal note, Happy Park is named after Happy Baggett, who passed away. But I knew Happy Baggett for years and years and years. Back when I was a very young planner right out of school, he was doing some work up in Trophy Club. And I was a consultant for the town of Trophy Club. And so I knew him for a very long time. But he was very involved in the Renaissance Heights development, Renaissance Square development, and they named the park there after him. But this is going to bring a splash pad, upgraded landscaping, trail, bigger green space for children, and a performing amphitheater space, is what Kenny Mosley, the executive director of Renaissance Heights Foundation, is reporting. So I think these are 2 fabulous things that are being supported by our Representative Mark Vesey.
Yeah. Money Mark Vesey. That's what we got to call him. Don't forget, he helped with our Panther Island, too. Make that moves happen as well.
He sure did.
So all good stuff. Now, let's go ahead and my win. My win is, I guess I'm going to just keep it simple. I think it's the people who listen to this podcast. I mean, you guys, sometimes I feel like, is it worth it? We come together as much as we can with our main time roles, and it's just a struggle sometimes, and sometimes we're messing up. I want to apologize to David Cook. I didn't add the E to the title. So, we record, we edit, we fund all this to have the studio, to do all these things, and, to keep showing up for this. And the fact that you guys listen, and the fact that people like Bud Kennedy listens and tweets it and says, hey, this is the Monday meeting for Fort Worth. That comes from the guy, once in a lifetime individual who cared about Fort Worth. Say that what you and I are doing is the Monday meeting for the city. I think that's pretty cool.
It is really
and
cool.
So, share with other people about this meeting that we gather together. And because the more of us who knows and are educated about the things that are happening around us, the better we can move for the people we care about, the communities we support, and the organizations we lead. So with that, we will see you guys the following week. We are not sure what will be there. We're working on a couple different interviews, possibly. We have a lot of travel, so it's just been really hard to get these interviews connected. But we got people wanting to come on who would share a lot of different things about a lot of different topics. So we're trying to make that work for you guys as well. But just stay updated and continue listening to the show.
Yep. Thanks for being here.
Whoa,